I moved back into my mother's house on a Wednesday. It wasn't a dramatic return, no storm overhead, no family argument. Just a quiet drive from the city and 2 cardboard boxes in the back seat of a borrowed Honda. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same maple trees shedding early, same crooked mailbox at the corner that always leaned left like it was listening to something. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was flaking more than I'd realized from photos. It still had that faint odor, damp wood and the ghost of her perfume. Lavender, maybe. I stood in the doorway for a few minutes before stepping inside. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a place I used to know and didn't want to meet again. She'd passed 3 months earlier. Cancer, quick and decisive. By the time she told me, it was already hospice care and final instructions. The will left me the house, to do what feels right. I wasn't sure what that meant. Sell it? Burn it down? I hadn't decided yet. The first night was uneventful. I heated canned soup, listened to a podcast, and fell asleep on the old couch. The bed in my old room still had sheets on it, but something about sleeping there felt wrong. Too intimate, maybe. Or just too far from the front door. The second night, I noticed the light. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a soft, horizontal line of glow beneath the door at the end of the hall. The one that had always been shut. Growing up, I never questioned it. It was just the locked room. My mother used it for storage, she said. I never saw inside. No one did. I paused at the edge of the hall, soup bowl in hand, squinting. The light was steady. Not flickering like a candle or jittering like a bad bulb. I didn't remember leaving anything on in there. Actually, I didn't remember ever having access to the room at all. I told myself it was just sunlight reflecting weirdly, but the clock on the microwave said 10:47 p.m. I looked again. The glow was too low, too focused. Like a phone screen facing down, left on overnight. But the door was still sealed. That same dull brass knob, unturned for decades. I went to bed early that night. I didn't look at the hallway again. The following morning, I went through the closets. She'd left behind so many coats, most of them too large or worn out to keep. One closet held a stack of board games with missing pieces and old Polaroids of people I didn't recognize. I kept myself busy. That's what they tell you to do. The door at the end of the hallway stayed shut. I walked past it a dozen times, each pass like a slow dare. I pressed my palm against the wood once. Cold, as if the room behind it had no heat. The rest of the house was stuffy. This was October, and the thermostat hadn't been touched in weeks. I thought about calling someone, maybe a locksmith. But what would I say? Hey, can you open this door that's probably full of holiday decorations? At 11:53 that night, I woke up on the couch. Not startled. Not sweating. Just awake. The house was utterly still. No creaks, no settling beams. Just an uncomfortable silence, thick like cotton in my ears. I didn't want to, but I stood up. The hallway was darker than it should have been. I flipped the switch. The light at the end buzzed weakly, then held. That glow was there again, under the door. A soft white line stretching the width of the frame. I took a few slow steps, half expecting it to vanish. It didn't. I crouched, just enough to tilt my head sideways and peek closer. The light wasn't spilling out, it was contained, like the door itself was holding it in. No sound. No movement. Just that gentle, unchanging glow. I stood up quickly, heart suddenly louder than it should have been. My skin prickled. The air felt thick. I walked away. 2 days later, I bumped into Mrs. O'Hara from next door. She looked older than I remembered, her voice rougher. "You staying long?" she asked, not unkindly. "Just figuring things out," I said. She nodded toward the house. "Still have that old sealed room?" I froze, then nodded. "Yeah." She didn't smile. It was always locked, even when we moved in across the street. Your mother never said why. Just storage, I think. Mrs. O'Hara pursed her lips. Maybe. We didn't talk after that. That night, I left my phone recording in the hallway. Just propped it on the floor, facing the door. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe proof that the light was real. That I wasn't imagining things. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up again. I hadn't set an alarm. The hallway was lit in that same narrow band. But something was off. The light flickered, like it was breathing. I stayed frozen on the couch, staring down the hallway for what felt like hours. It didn't change. It didn't move. But I couldn't look away. Eventually, I fell asleep sitting up. In the morning, I checked the video. No light. Just a still hallway. Silence. No flicker, no glow. Nothing. But 2 hours and 16 minutes in, there was a sound. Faint. Like fabric dragging across hardwood. Slow. Measured. And then, a whisper. Barely audible. Rachel. I deleted the video. Not out of fear. More like denial. The door remains shut. The light, persistent. Every night, a little brighter. And sometimes, I think, it's waiting. I started waking up at midnight without setting an alarm. At first, I thought it was just the change in routine. My body adjusting to the silence, maybe. The city used to wrap me in noise, ambulances, drunk laughter, streetlights buzzing through the blinds. Here, the quiet felt unnatural. It pressed against me, too still, too complete. Like something holding its breath. By the fifth night, I stopped pretending it was coincidence. Every night, around 12:03 a.m., I'd blink awake and find myself alert. Not startled. Just awake and aware. And every night, I would look down the hallway. And there it was. That thin line of light, steady and pale, like before. Only now, it seemed to pulse slightly. Not in brightness, but in presence. As if the door exhaled gently, and the light was its breath. I didn't record it again. I'd already learned that cameras didn't capture it. I tried once more, just to be sure. The phone showed nothing but a dark, empty hall. The light never appeared on screen. But it was there. I could see it, plain as anything. I stopped turning on the overhead lights at night. They made the glow under the door look more artificial, like it could be explained away. But in the dark, the contrast was too clean. The light wasn't coming from this world. That was the only way I could phrase it, even in my own mind. I started sleeping less. I'd nap in the afternoon, stay up past midnight, wait to see if the pattern would change. It didn't. The door stayed locked. The light came exactly when it wanted to. I couldn't touch it, couldn't understand it, but I began to expect it. That frightened me more than anything. I stopped going outside. Not consciously. I just realized, sometime around the third week, that I hadn't left the house in days. The mailbox was probably overflowing. My phone rang once, my ex, I think, but I didn't answer. There wasn't much I could say that wouldn't sound strange. The world outside the windows seemed to shrink. Leaves built up along the porch, fluttered against the screen door. No one knocked. No one visited. If the house ever had a pulse, it slowed when she died. And now it felt like it was only breathing because of that room. I tried opening it once. The doorknob turned, slightly, like it might give. I felt a draft, cold and dry. Not musty, not stale, just absent. Like the room didn't hold air. I didn't push harder. I don't know why. Maybe I feared that if I opened it fully, something would open in return. I started hearing noises. Not loud ones. Nothing you'd hear unless you were waiting for them. Soft shifts. A creak that didn't belong to the old pipes. A weight shifting on the other side of the door. Sometimes I imagine bare feet sliding across the floor, no rhythm, no pattern. Just movement. Once, around 1 a.m., I heard what sounded like a slow knock. Not a demand. More like a polite reminder. I didn't respond. I lay on the couch, heart beating steadily against my ribs, and waited for morning. I remembered something strange from childhood. A time when I was maybe 8, watching cartoons too late. My mom had come out of her room and turned off the TV, annoyed. I whined. She told me to go to sleep. I said I couldn't, because the light was back. She froze. Not like someone caught off guard. More like someone recognizing a word they'd tried to forget. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she turned the TV back on, lowered the volume, and said, "Keep watching. Just don't open any doors." I never thought much of it until now. On the 7th night, I stood at the end of the hallway. It was almost 1 in the morning. I hadn't slept. The glow stretched across the floor like a boundary line. A soft, glowing underline beneath a sentence no one wrote. I didn't cross it. I leaned my back against the opposite wall and just watched. The silence was thick. My ears searched for sound, but found only themselves. My skin felt too tight, my breath too loud. The longer I looked at the light, the more I felt it noticing me. Not seeing, not watching, just acknowledging. Like the light was aware that I was finally acknowledging it back. The urge to speak was strong. I almost whispered something. A question. A name. Anything. But I stayed quiet. Whatever this was, it didn't need a name. I started marking the nights on a notepad. Small, neat lines. One for each midnight. It helped me feel grounded, somehow. Like I had control. But after the 9th line, I noticed something odd. The pencil marks looked smudged, faintly curved. As if the page had been held, gently, by damp fingers. My hands were clean. I was sure of it. I tore that page out and started a new one. The next morning, the paper was gone. By the 10th night, I didn't need to walk to the hallway. I felt the light appear. Like the house adjusted to its arrival. The pressure in the air shifted slightly, and the quiet deepened. Even the floor seemed to settle beneath it. I stayed seated that time. Didn't move. Just sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, heart ticking like a metronome. The light didn't flicker. But I swear, for a moment, the temperature in the room dropped, just enough for my breath to fog the air. I told myself I was imagining it. I always did. I don't know how to explain the difference between loneliness and being alone with something. It's subtle, but unmistakable. Loneliness is empty space. It's the absence of sound, of people, of purpose. But being alone with something, even when you can't see it, is different. It's knowing something is sharing your space. Quietly. Without permission. Without form. That's what the house became. I haven't spoken to anyone in days. I think about texting someone, just to break the silence. But what would I say? I think the locked room is watching me. I can't tell if the light is real, but it waits for me. There's something behind the door, and I think it knows my name. No one wants to hear that. Not even me. But the light will come again tonight. It always does. And I'll be awake. The night I decided to speak to it, everything felt off, even before it began. The air was too still, like the house had taken a shallow breath and held it. The fridge hummed slightly louder than usual. The clock in the kitchen ticked slower, or maybe I was just noticing it more. I hadn't left the house in almost 2 weeks. There wasn't much reason to. The food hadn't run out yet, and the silence didn't feel threatening anymore. Just familiar. It's strange how quickly you can get used to something. Even something wrong. The notepad with the nightly marks had disappeared again. I didn't bother looking this time. There were too many small things like that now, little misplacements I couldn't explain. Cups where I hadn't left them. One sock missing. the hallway light flickering when I passed under it, but only once each night. The house wasn't reacting randomly. It was deliberate. Measured. Patient. The door at the end of the hallway remained closed. The glow had changed over time. Subtly. It was no longer that cold, sterile white. It had deepened, faintly blue some nights, golden on others. Tonight it was amber. Warm, almost. Like firelight through heavy curtains. But there was no heat. Only that soft, unnatural radiance crawling beneath the frame. I watched it for a long time. I sat on the floor, back against the hallway wall, knees pulled up, head tilted sideways to line my eyes with the glow. No movement. No sounds at first. Just the steady thrum of quiet and my own shallow breathing. Then, finally, something changed. It started low. Barely there. A sound beneath sound. Breathing. Not mine. Slower. Deeper. Steady and unfamiliar. It wasn't loud. In fact, I might not have heard it at all if I hadn't already been straining every nerve toward silence. But once I noticed, I couldn't unhear it. A long inhale. A longer exhale. Rhythmic. Patient. It came from behind the door, no question. I stayed still. My hands had gone cold without my noticing. For a moment, I wondered if it was trying to match me. To mimic how I breathed. I held my breath to test the thought. The sound behind the door did not stop. It continued, unbothered. I whispered, before I could stop myself. "Hello?" The breathing paused. Not entirely, just one beat too long. As if it had registered my voice. And then it resumed. Slower now. Like it was listening. The hallway suddenly felt narrower. The shadows stretched farther than they should have. I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on the light. I approached the door for the first time in days. Not quickly. Not with any real plan. Just one step, then another. The sound behind the door didn't change, but I felt something new, a pressure, faint but insistent, as if the air on either side of the door was not quite the same. Like I had entered a different pocket of atmosphere entirely. I reached for the knob. It was warm. Every other time it had been cold, icy, even, but tonight, it felt like skin. I pulled my hand back. Not dramatically. Just instinctively. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what I was waiting for. Maybe a sign. Maybe for it to open on its own. It didn't. Nothing happened. I walked away. At 3:11 a.m., I woke up on the couch again. This had become routine. Fall asleep without intending to. Wake up without memory of drifting off. Always around the same time. Always with that faint hum in the walls. The hallway was dark. The glow had disappeared. But the door was open. Not wide. Just slightly. 3 inches, maybe 4. Enough. I stood. I didn't think. I just moved. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. The air had changed again, cooler now, and dry. The kind of air you find in basements or disused attics. The kind that hasn't held breath for years. I stopped in front of the door. No light inside. Just an empty black. The breathing had stopped. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see inside, but the space beyond swallowed light. My own shadow didn't reach the threshold. I placed my hand on the edge of the door. "Is someone there?" I said, too softly. The silence that answered wasn't hollow. It was full. A presence pressed against it. As if the darkness wasn't absence, but occupation. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe I expected something more obvious. Something dramatic. A scream, a sudden push, a hand from the dark. But none of that happened. Instead, a voice, not sound, but presence, filled the space behind the door. And it said nothing. It just waited. That's what I remember most. Not fear. Not even confusion. But the waiting. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't angry. It was patient. I backed away, slowly. The door didn't move. The air didn't change. I returned to the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at nothing until morning. The door was closed again by sunrise. I didn't touch it. I didn't try to open it. I didn't speak. There's nothing left to say. The light still comes, every night. Always at the same time. The breathing returns now and then. I know it will again. But I won't open the door. Not anymore. I understand now. It was never a room. It was a mouth.